Breakpoints in WinDBG is awesome. Let me show you some advanced breakpoint techniques. Setting breakpoints is the bread and butter of debugging a process in WinDBG. Let's first start with the basics and then move on to some fun advanced tricks. Let's start with an instance of WinDBG. So I have an instance of WinDBG here which I have used to launch a process. This process was specifically written to trigger breakpoints so that I can show how to trigger advanced breakpoints using WinDBG. Let me start first by breaking into the debugger and clearing the screen. The first way to set a basic breakpoint is to use BP or BU. BP is to set a breakpoint on a symbol or a memory address. BU is to set a breakpoint that has not been resolved yet on a symbol. The reason that there is two different commands to set a breakpoint is that unresolved breakpoints get resolved when the module is loaded into memory. So for example, if you want to set a breakpoint on a DLL and that DLL has not been loaded into memory yet, you have to use BU. Let's go ahead and set some breakpoints. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to search for the module. The executable's name is conbp1. This executable is loaded in memory and is currently running. I'm going to set some breakpoints on this executable. To aid me in setting this breakpoint, what I'm going to do is I'm going to search the memory for conbp1 and I'm going to search the symbols for this particular class. The X command can search with wildcards. So if I run this command, I'm going to get all the methods that belong to this particular class. The function I want to set the breakpoint on is this function here, onSetVar_clicked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this function over here and I can see that this function over here is located at this location. If I want to set a breakpoint on this function, there are two ways I can do it. The first way, very simply, is to just do BP with the full symbol and the breakpoint will be set. The second way is to put the breakpoint directly on a memory address. I can actually just take the memory address over here and put the breakpoint on this memory address. It does work, but for this example, I'm just going to use the full symbol. It doesn't make any difference which one you do because it's actually the same memory address. That is why it keeps saying breakpoint 0 redefined. Setting an unresolved breakpoint is the same as setting a resolved breakpoint. Just use the symbol and don't use memory addresses because the module has not loaded yet. So if I ran this command again, but instead of doing BP, if I did BU, this would be an unresolved breakpoint. Because the module is already loaded in memory, it just becomes a resolved breakpoint anyway. To manage breakpoints that have already been loaded, it's pretty simple. You have a few commands like BL, which can see the breakpoints that you have. You have BD, which if given a number can disable a breakpoint, and you have BE which can enable a breakpoint. This is all fairly simple stuff, so let's just try to trigger this breakpoint and move on to more advanced stuff. Let me just run this program. So I'm going to press run over here, and if I press this button setvar, it's going to trigger the breakpoint. And in my instance of WinDBG, I've already set up the path to the source code, so the source code appears. And this is the function that it hits. Now looking at the code over here, I can see that in the code that there are two variables that are being modified. What if we could set a breakpoint on the variables? Well, in WinDBG you can, which is by using the BA command. BA, or break on access, is a command in WinDBG to put a breakpoint that isn't actually attached to a piece of code, but rather when memory changes. You can put BA on read, BA on write, or BA on execute. If you put BA on write on a variable, the breakpoint will trigger on whichever line of code that changes that variable. Let's go ahead and do that. So I have a global variable over here, which is instantiated with the number 200. I'm going to put a breakpoint on the right of that global variable. So how I do that is pretty straightforward. What I do is, I just take the name of the global variable over here. I'm just going to search for where it is in memory. So if I go to X over here and I put that global variable, let's just see. it resolves to a particular address. As long as the variable resolves to an address, you can use it in BA. So how I use it is, I use the symbol, I just do BA, W means write, 4 bytes because it's a D word, it's 4 bytes. I'm just going to put the variable over here. Now, let me just disable my other breakpoint, which I set earlier, which is the breakpoint 0. I'm going to clear it because I don't need it anymore. And if I check, I only have one breakpoint now. Let me just close this, which is on the variable. So let's go ahead and trigger this breakpoint. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to run the program. Press F5. There we are. Okay, so the program is now running. And if I press set var over here, it will actually change that variable and trigger the breakpoint. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I press set var, there we are. It has triggered a change, and currently the instruction pointer is here. Be cautious of one thing in WinDebug. The instruction pointer, this colored bar over here, is sometimes below the line because that's just how WinDebug draws it. The actual command is that it changed this variable ++ global var, and that's what triggered this breakpoint. If I press K over here, I can see clearly in the stack that I'm now located at this location over here, which is this file, line 164. So the breakpoint is actually triggered based on the writing to the variable. This technique is especially handy when you don't know which line of code is actually changing the variable, or there are many lines of code that are changing the variable. It's very easy. You can just set a breakpoint on the variable itself. Now, using this knowledge, you can actually even tune breakpoints so that they only trigger when particular variables have a particular number. So let's go ahead and do that. Let me clear the screen and let's put a conditional breakpoint. A conditional breakpoint is a breakpoint that only triggers when a particular condition is met. So how you set a conditional breakpoint is that you just use BP and you provide a parameter that says it is conditional. So I'm going to set the same breakpoint that I did earlier, my BP breakpoint over here. But this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in a parameter which is /w. /w means that this is a conditional breakpoint. Conditional breakpoints need an expression. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide an expression by putting it in double quotes over here. And the expression I'm going to put is I'm going to put the global variable that I had earlier. And I'm going to say that if this variable is equivalent to the value 203, then activate the breakpoint. So if I press enter, it's going to save this breakpoint. And if I look at it here, it's going to show that this breakpoint has been set, and this is the condition in when to trigger it. Let me just move the screen a bit. I think it's not possible to see clearly. So this is the condition that you will see on the breakpoint if the condition has been set. So let's go ahead and trigger this breakpoint. So the way to trigger this breakpoint is that this program that I wrote, I can clear the count of the global variable, and then whenever I press set var, it's going to increment by 1. So when it hits the value 203, the next time the breakpoint will be triggered. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I press it 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and on the 4th time, it's going to hit the breakpoint. This technique is very useful because you can set very complex expressions and you can use it in place of enabling or disabling breakpoints to hit conditional breakpoints. So for example, if you have a function that is very noisy, being called a lot, you could put an expression to lower down the occurrence of when the breakpoint hits so that it only hit exactly when you wanted it to. Now, there are other variations of parameters that you can use to control the number of occurrence of the breakpoint hitting. Another combination is to use /1. This means that this breakpoint is a one-off breakpoint. So for example, if I were to trigger this breakpoint, the first time the breakpoint will trigger, but if I were to trigger it a second time, nothing will happen. So the one-off breakpoint is just for the scenario where you want to put a breakpoint, but you don't really want it to be in the list after it has triggered. There are also other combinations of parameters that can be used to control when a breakpoint is activated. I'll put some links in the description below on the documentation for breakpoint to see the other combinations. One last variation on breakpoint which I use a lot is BM. So let me just break into the debugger and clear the screen. So BM means break multiple, What that means is BM will put a breakpoint on every permutation of that symbol. So for example, if I search for a symbol like that, I get a list of functions that satisfies my search. If I were to run BM on this, it will put a breakpoint in every one of these found symbols, which is a method. BP, BU, BM, and the conditional BP are the most used breakpoints that I use when I debug. The one-shot breakpoint and the data breakpoint is a bit more rare, but it's good to know that these kinds of controls do exist to aid you in debugging complex programs. Now, there is also complex WinDBG syntax which can create conditional breakpoints. I'm gonna skip that for this video because scripting of WinDBG is a bit more advanced. I would like to make a video dedicated to scripting WinDBG. In that video, I will show how to use the J command to make a conditional breakpoint. For this video, I think I will just end it there with the basic conditional breakpoint using BP, the access breakpoint using BA, and BM, which is the break multiple. Anyway, these are the techniques that I use often. They do work on .NET. I will make a video dedicated to these kind of advanced breakpoint techniques using .NET, because in .NET you can do more advanced tricks by putting breakpoints even on code that has not been compiled yet. So I'll make a dedicated video just for .NET, but some of these tricks like the BP does work on .NET if you can find the exact memory address of the .NET method. Do you use these techniques? If you do, let me know in the comments below which techniques do you use and if any that I did not cover. Gentle reminder to subscribe, hit that bell icon and give a like if you like the content. It helps the channel grow. As always, it's been a pleasure bringing you this information. I am High Voice, signing out.